and good evening and hello. Welcome to It's About Time. And today we will be covering Second Chronicles 28 and Second Kings chapters 16 and 17. And I am Trudy. So let's get started. So Second Chronicles starts off, Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 16 years in Jerusalem. He did not do right in the sight of the Lord as his father, our forefathers, David has done. So now we see that there's a repeat of this history, that they continue on with the same things, not doing right by the Lord. Instead, he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel and even made cast images for the Baals. And he burned incense in the valley of Hinnom, Ben-Hinnom, and burned his sons as an offering. So now we're seeing that the other idol worship that's coming on and the child sacrifices that were made to the god of Molech. So we'll see that too. In the accordance with the repulsive acts of the pagan nation whom the Lord had driven out before the sons, descendants of Israel. He also sacrificed and burned incense on the high places of pagan worship and on the hills and under every green tree. Now, here is where we get to see that they start to do these particular gods and idols that they would make out of trees, and how they would make certain carvings and not allow the branches to grow, but almost like skin the tree so that they could shape and build faces and objects on these trees. So wherever you looked under these green trees, you would see those symbols that had been carved into trees. Therefore, the Lord his God handed over Ahaz to the king of Aram, Syria, who defeated him and led him away a great number of the people as captives and brought them to Damascus. And he was also handed over to the king of Israel, who struck Judah with a great slaughter. So God handed them over. God can use anyone to do his will. So we see this is what's going on here. For Pekah, son of Ramaliah, killed 120,000 in Judah in one day, all courageous men. These were not scary men. These were strong men. They're front men, because they had abandoned and turned their back from the Lord God of their fathers. And Zikri, a warrior of Ephraim, killed Messiah, the king's son, and Azrikam, the governor of the house, and Elkanah, who was second in power to the king. So all those people that had critical roles were actually annihilated. And the sons of Israel led away captives 200,000 of the kinsmen of Judah, women, sons, and daughters, and they also took great quantities of spoil from them and brought it to Samaria. So that means that they took all the riches that they had and they actually brought it over to another country. But a prophet of the Lord was there, whose name was Obed. And he went out to meet the army and was returning to Samaria and said to them, Behold, because the Lord, the God of your fathers, was angry with Judah, he handed them over to you. But you have killed them in a rage that has reached as far as heaven. So they just went over an overkill. God allowed them the victory, but they just weren't content with that. They just had to just ravish everything. And now you intend to subjugate the people of Judah, meaning bringing them back into a type of bondage slavery, and Jerusalem as male and female slaves for yourselves. But as you yourselves not guilty of transgressions against the Lord your God? It's like, how are you? It's like the pot calling the kettle black. This is what he's saying. Now, therefore, hear me and return the captives whom you have captured from their brothers, fellow descendants of Israel, Jacob, for instance. For the burning anger of the Lord is against you. What you once had the will of God, or the hand of God leading you, now because of your action, God is going to be angry with you. Then some of the heads of the Ephraimites of Israel, Azariah the son of Johanan, Berechiah, and the son of Meshillemah, Jehiskiah the son of Shallum, and Amasa the son of Hawlai, took a stand against those who were returning from the battle, and said to them, You must not bring the captives in here. They didn't want any problems. They already heard that the Lord's hand was off of them and that the wrath of God was going to come. So they were saying, we don't want any problems coming here. And for we are guilty before the Lord already. And what you intend to do will add more to our sins and our guilt. For our guilt is so great that his burning anger is against Israel. They didn't want that smoke from God. So the armed men of Israel left the captives and the spoils of Judah before the officers and all the assembly. Now, can you imagine going and ravishing and amassing all of these different things? But because you knew the power of God, that you would not want to go against him, and they dropped all of those things that they had and did not bring them into the city. Then the men who were designated by names rose up and took the captives, and from the spoils they clothed all those who were naked. They clothed them and gave them sandals and fed them and gave them something to drink, anointed them with oil, and was a host of duties, and led all the feeble ones on donkeys, and they brought them to Jericho, the city of palm trees, to their brothers, fellow descendants of Israel, and they returned to Samaria. So what happened was a blessing out of all of that that took place. That those people that were less fortunate were able to actually have clothing. They were actually able to have uh, food to eat and to drink and oil as well. At that time, King Ahaz sent word to the king of Assyria to ask him for help. For the Edomites had come again and attacked Judah and led away captives. The Philistines had also invaded the cities of the low country of the Negev, the south country of Judah, and had taken Beth Shemesh, Ajalon, Gederoth, and Soko with their villages, and also Timnah with its villages, and Gizmo with its villages, and they settled there. So there was a mass way that they actually came and they took everyone. They took everyone. For the Lord humbled Judah of Ahaz, king of Israel, for Ahaz had allowed unrestrained and undisciplined behavior in Judah and had been very unfaithful to the Lord. So he was just whatever was up that he just allowed them to do, and he did not follow the rules of the Lord and the covenants that were given. So this is where he fell from favor with God. Let's take a look at this. So this talks about where they capture. So there's Gizma, Ajalon, Timnah, Beth Shemesh, and Sokosh. This is the travel that they actually took where they conquered everyone. So here's Philistia here. So the Philistines came across and they went up and they conquered everyone. Okay. So Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came against him and harassed him instead of strengthening and supporting him. Although Ahaz took a portion of treasure from the house of the Lord and from the house or the palace of the king and from the leaders and gave it as a tribute to the king of Assyria, it did not help Ahaz. Now we remember that Tilgath said that he was just not impressed by that and he would not be swayed because what he wanted was what he wanted and it didn't matter how much you gave him. That's exactly what it was. In the time of his distress, the same king Ahaz became yet more unfaithful to the Lord, for he sacrificed to their gods of Damascus, which had defeated him. And he said, since the gods of the kings of Aram, Syria, helped them, I will sacrifice to them so that they may help me. Uh-oh, here we go again. But they became the ruin and downfall of him and all of Israel. Then Ahaz collected the utensils of the house of God, and he cut them into pieces, and he shut the doors of the house of the Lord, and made altars for himself in every corner of Jerusalem. In every city of Judah, he made high places to burn incense to other gods, provoking to anger the Lord and the God of his fathers. So here he goes doing his own thing again and not seeking God and not rendering his heart, but creating once again idols in different places. And to make it add insult to injury, he went and took the sacred things that were in the temple to actually do these things. He says, now the rest of his acts and all his ways, from the first to the last, behold, they were written in the book of the king of Judah and Israel. And Ahaz slept with his fathers in death, and they buried him in the city in Jerusalem, but they did not bring him into the tombs of the kings of Israel, and his son Hezekiah reigned in his place. Let's go over to 2 Kings. So we have 2 Kings 16. It starts off in the 17th year of Pekah, the son of Remaliah. Ahaz, the son of Jotham, king of Judah, became king. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. He did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord his God, as his ancestors, David had done. So here again, we have the same repeating statement about him falling away from what he should have done. Instead, he walked in the ways of the idolatrous kings of Israel, and even made his son pass through the fire as a human sacrifice. Here again is about Molech, the god that they had where they sacrificed the children. If you remember in our past studies that they would put them through fire and then they would keep drum sounds so loud that you couldn't hear the cries of the children. In accordance with the repulsive and idolatrous practice of the pagan nation whom the Lord drove out before the Israelites. So God had fixed this. Now he's resurrected, not God, but Ahaz has resurrected its practice. He also sacrificed and burnt incense on the high places and on the hills and under every green tree. Here again is where they're starting off and making all of these idols all through every place, high places. You just could not get away from them, that every place that you could see was actually reflective of this pagan nation. Then Rezin, the king of Aram, Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, came up to Jerusalem to wage war. They besieged Ahaz, but could not overcome and conquer him. At the time, Rezin, king of Aram, recovered Elath in Edom for Aram and drove the Jews away from it. The Arameans came to Elath and lived there to this day. So we see how, as it talks about current events, how because of the things that they did then are reflective in what happens right now. So a lot of times when we see a lot of wars and disturbance over in the Middle East, this is the reason why, that it has been a biblical proportion that these things have carried on. Let's go on. So Ahaz sent messengers to Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, saying, I am your servant and son. Come up and rescue me from the hands of the kings of Aram and of Israel, who are rising up against me. And we already know what he said. He's not interested in any of those things, in bribes and helping and none of these things. And Ahaz took the silver and the gold that was found in the house of the Lord. Shame on you. And in the treasuries of the king's house, and sent a gift to the king of Assyria. So the king of Assyria listened to him, and he went up against Damascus and captured it, and carried its people away into exile to Kir, and put Rezin, king of Aram, to death. Now King Ahaz went to Damascus to meet Tiglath-Pileser, the king of Assyria, and saw the pagan altar which was at Damascus. Then King Ahaz sent a model of the altar to Urijah, the priest, along with a detailed pattern for all of its construction. So Urijah, the priest, built an altar in accordance with everything that King Ahaz had sent from Damascus. That is how Urijah, the priest, made it before King Ahaz returned from Damascus. Now, can you imagine? He's just so blatant with it that he's going to send his own plans, knowing that he has stolen from the house of God, that he wants to erect all these things, yet to a false God, and he fails to render his life to the true and living God. So that's a lot. When the king came from Damascus, he saw the altar. The king approached the altar and offered sacrifices on it. And he burned his burnt offerings and his grain offerings, and poured out his drink offering, and sprinkled the blood of his peace offerings on the altar. He brought the bronze altar, which was before the Lord, from the front of the house, the temple, from between the new altar and the house of the Lord, and put it on the north side of the new altar. Then King Ahaz commanded Urijah the priest, saying, "Upon the great new altar, burn this morning's burnt offering and the evening grain offering." And the king burnt offerings and his grain offering with the burnt offerings of all the people of the land, and their grain offering and their drink offerings, and sprinkled on the new altar all the blood of the burnt offerings and the blood of all the sacrifices. Now, usually when they're talking about with the blood on the of the sacrifices, here what he would do was basically take the entrails of the sacrifices, and the sacrifices were usually children, and they would go through their intestines to look for omens and different things like that. So this is what he's talking about, totally against everything that God would talk about, because God had a preference on how the sacrifices were actually to be handled. But the old bronze altar shall be kept for me to use for to exam to examine the sacrifices. So this is where he's talking about, where he wants to go through the entrails or go through the intestines and look at all these things for the omens or whatever he's looking for to give him a sign. Urijah, the priest, acted in accordance with everything that King Ahaz commanded. Then King Ahaz cut away the frames of the basin stands in the temple and removed the basins from each of them. And he took down the large seat from the bronze oxen which was under it, and put it on a plastered stone floor. Now we know where there were specific guidelines on how things were supposed to be built in the house, in the temple, and now he has come in and destroyed these things. He removed the house of the Lord and covered way for the Sabbath which they had built in the house, and the outer entrance of the king, because of the king of Assyria, who might confiscate it. Now the rest of the acts of Ahaz, are they not written in the books of the Chronicles of the king of Judah? So Ahaz slept with his father in death, and was buried with his father in the city of David, and his son Hezekiah became king in his place. Now here the difference is that we see here, they're saying that he was buried in the same place, but the previous chapter that we were in over in Second Chronicles told us that he did not get the same kingly burial like the rest of them did. Okay, let's move on. All right, so okay, sorry about that. Okay, so we're in 17 now. So in the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, Hoshea, the son of Elah, became king over Israel and Samaria, and reigned for 9 years. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, but not as the kings of Israel who came before him. Shalmaneser, the fifth, king of Assyria, came up against him, and Hoshea became his servant and paid him tribute, paid him money. We talked about this before. Those that are less than have to pay in recognition of those that are above you. But the king of Assyria discovered a conspiracy in Hoshea, who sent messengers to king of Egypt, and offered no tribute to the king of Assyria. So it was like kind of backstabbing. How are you going to go and do it for one and not do it for the other one? So the other one became offended, and as he had done years by years. Therefore, the king of Assyria arrested him and bound him in prison. Then the king of Assyria invaded all the lands of Israel, and went up to Samaria and besieged it for 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria, and carried the people of Israel into exile to Assyria. And he settled them in Halah, and in Habor, by the rivers of Gozan, and in the cities of Medes. And this is what happened to them, that the children of Israel, they just kept becoming captured all the time, and became back in bondage. Why? Because of their disobedience. Now this came about because the Israelites, excuse me, had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up from the land of Egypt, and from under the hands of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and they had feared and worshipped other gods, and walked in the customs of the pagan nations whom the Lord had driven out before the descendants of Israel, and in the pagan custom of the kings of Israel, which they had introduced. So God had brought them from these things, and they just keep seeming to fall into these same things over and over again. The Israelites ascribed things to the Lord their God which were not true. They built for themselves high places of worship in all their towns, and from the lonely lookout towers to the populous fortified cities. So every place that you went, you would see some type of idol where they were to be able to worship. And high or low, it did not matter. They set up for themselves sacred pillars, memorial stones, and asherums on every high hill and under every green tree. Now, this again is what we're talking about, where you start to see that they would make sure that they were either carvings that were of faces of these gods that they have imagined, or there was a stacking of rocks in a certain particular formation that was still supposed to symbolize this asherum um, format, so that you would be able to witness and know that was what that was dedicated for. And again, we talked about the trees where they cut off the branches and they sculpt out faces and different things like that. And the only part that is left is the very top that is the green portion of the tree. And there they burned incense on all the high places, just as the pagan nations whom the Lord had deported before them, and they did evil and contemptible things, provoking the Lord to anger. Here they go again. And they served idols of which the Lord had said to them, "You shall not do these things." Word tells us that we should not have any other God before him, that he is a jealous God. He reiterates this here for the children of Israel, but yet they're still doing the same thing. Yet the Lord warned Israel and Judah through all his prophets and every seer, saying, "Turn from your evil ways and keep my commandments and my statutes in accordance with all the laws which I commanded your fathers and which I sent to you by my servant the prophets." Now, when he starts talking about that, where he sent those laws, we remember the laws came down with Moses. So this is what he's talking about. What I've sent these are not brand new. These have been passed down, which you should know already, but yet you still refuse to actually render. However, they did not listen, but stiffened their necks and did as their fathers who did not believe, trust in, rely on, remain steadfast to the Lord their God. They rejected his statutes and his covenants which he had made with their fathers, as well as his warnings that he gave them. And they followed vanity, that is, false gods, idols here, and became vain, empty headed. Everything's about them. They can't think of anything else. It's all about them. They followed the pagan practices of the nations which surrounded them, although the Lord had commanded that they were not to do so, as they did. Here again, the Lord is constantly warning them, don't do this, come away from here. He's sending people, he's sending everything, and they still will not respond. They abandoned all of the commandments of the Lord their God and made for themselves cast images of two calves, and they made an Asherah idol and the worship of all the starry hosts of heavens and served Baal. So we're talking about all of the astrology at this point, the starry portions. They made gods for all of those things, and then Ashur was uh, known as the goddess of all. She was the goddess of everything. So all these things, God was not enough to these people. So they had to keep trying to create something, but yet we know that in the end that it all fails. They made their sons and their daughters pass through the fire as human sacrifice. This is again with the Molech stuff that's going on. And use divination or fortune teller to tell the future and enchantments. And they sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. As we remember in a lot of these things, that they participated in a lot of sexual type things. So when it talks about they sold themselves, they were trading themselves off for different things, and that's what they were using as basic currency with their body. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them from his sight None of the tribes were left except for the tribe of Judah. Judah did not keep the commandments of the Lord their God either, but walked in the customs which Israel introduced. So the Lord rejected all the descendants of Israel, all the descendants of Jacob, and repeatedly afflicted them and handed them over to plunders until he had cast them out of his sight. So he kept letting them get into situation and situation that it would lead to their demise, that they were no longer, they did not exist until that particular disease is gone from them. So they would not have that at all. When he had torn Israel from the royal house of David, they made Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, king. And Jeroboam drove Israel away from following the Lord and made them commit a great sin. For the Israelites walked in all of the idolatrous sins which Jeroboam committed. They did not turn from them. So this thing just continues on and on and on until the Lord removed Israel from his sight, as just as he had foretold through all his servants, the prophets. Now, all of those servants, those prophets that were coming, we talked about a lot of these prophets, Amos, Micah, we have Isaiah, we have all these people that are coming that are talking to these people, but yet they do not render. And then it says, so Israel went into exile from their own land to Assyria to this date, the day of this writing. So here again, where we can understand where these fights that start to happen, and we see how they actually balance for today, how they spill over to today. So the next time you see the news and you start to see those things, you know where it actually came from. The king of Assyria brought from Babylon, uh, and from Cutheth, and from Ava, and from Hamath, and Sepharvaim, and settled them in the cities of Samaria, in place of the sons or the people of Israel. They took possession of Samaria and lived in its city. So they overtook a city. Now they began to live there. They did not fear the Lord. Therefore, the Lord sent lions among them, which killed some of them. So still, I don't see it. The Lord can move and call things to happen, but yet they were not shaken from where they were. So the king of Assyria was told, the nations whom you have sent into exile and settled in the cities of Samaria do not know the customs of the God, little God of the land. So he has sent lions among them, and they are killing them because they do not know the manner of worship demanded by the God of the land. Then the king of Assyria commanded, take back to Samaria one of the priests whom you brought there from there, and have him go and live there, and have him teach the people the custom of the God of the land. Can you imagine that? You want to go back and send? So it's like, okay. So one of the priests whom they had exiled from Samaria came back and lived in Bethel and taught them how they should fear and worship the Lord. But every nation still made gods on its own, and they put them in the house shrines of the high places which the Samaritans had made, every nation in its cities where they lived. Then the men of Babylon made Succoth Benoth, and the men of Cuth made Nergal. The men of Hamath made Ashima. The Avites made Nibhaz and Tartak, and the Sepharvites burned their children in the fire of Adramelech and Anamelech, the gods of Sepharvaim. So here we see in 31 that it just tells that nothing changed, and they failed to render to the true and living God and continue to build these idols with barbaric sacrifices. How do you sacrifice your children like that? And they are also feared the Lord and appointed from themselves priests of the high places who sacrifice for them in the houses of the high places. They feared the Lord, yet served their own gods. How are you going to be? Can't be cold and hot and straddling the fence. Now, either you serve God or you serve the other ones. But here I guess they thought they were in the safety zone of what they were doing, following the customs of the nations from among whom they had been sent into exile. To this day, they act in accordance with their former pagan customs. They do not really fear the Lord, nor do they obey their statutes and ordinance, nor the laws, nor the commandments which the Lord commanded the sons, the descendants of Jacob, whom he named Israel. With whom the Lord had made a covenant and commanded them, saying, You shall not fear other gods or bow yourself to them, nor serve them, nor sacrifice to them. But the Lord who brought you up from the land of Egypt with great power and outstretched arms, him you shall fear, and to him you shall bow yourselves down, and to him you shall sacrifice. So God is putting things in order right now. It's just in case you don't know, I'm telling you, this is what you have to do. The statutes and the ordinance and the law and the commandments which he wrote for you by the hand of Moses, you shall observe and do forever. You shall not fear, worship, or serve other gods. The covenant that I have made with you, you shall not forget. You shall not fear other gods, but the Lord your God you shall fear and worship. Then he will rescue you from the hands of all your enemies. However, they did not listen, but they acted in accordance with their former customs. So the nations superficially feared the Lord. They were playing with it just to show face, you know. If God's not looking for actors, he's looking for true conversion. They also served their idols as did their children and their children's children, just as their fathers did. So do they to this day, the day of this writing. They just didn't learn. It's just really, really sad that God made himself available for them, but they just could not change over. We come to a great part into our reading for today, and it is a part where you can make the right choice, that you can turn from your ways, to understand that you have a God that is a jealous God, that he's standing there with open arms, wanting to love you and teach you how to follow his will and not be stuck off into all of these other gods and idols. And when we think about it, they had particular carving idols, but what type of idols do we have? Is our job, our car, our family? Are we addicted to social media, TV, food? What idols are we putting before him today? Let's make sure that we get it right, that we turn from our wicked ways, and that we acknowledge the true and living God. We have our salvation prayer today, and if you would repeat after me, this is how we will do it. Father, it is written in your word that if I confess with my mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in my heart that you have raised him from the dead, I shall be saved. Therefore, Father, I confess that Jesus is my Lord. I make him Lord of my life right now. I believe in my heart that you raised Jesus from the dead. I renounce my past life with Satan and close the doors to any of his devices. I thank you for forgiving me of all my sins. Jesus is my Lord, and I am a new creation. Old things have passed away. Now all things become new. In Jesus' name, amen. If you said that prayer, it's just that simple. Welcome to the body of Christ. Make sure that you go into the chat and you actually tell us where you're from, and so that we can actually celebrate with you, as well as possibly assisting you to a church home that can love on you and help you grow in grace as you start to get close to the Father and learn his laws and his ordinance and his commandments for your life. Make sure you share and like this video so that it helps us get out to more people. So be with us again tomorrow at 6 o'clock. For this is about time, where we are the 21st century watchmen, and we are going through the Bible chronologically in 1 year. And we want to tell the Bible story so that it can be understood. All right. God bless you, and I will see you later.